This is Pantheon Plus, a podcast where we go beyond tights and flights to explore other genres and movies from the past. Each month we'll have a theme. This month we look back at the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Each week we'll pick a movie related to that theme. This week we look at Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
Sauron moves to strike the city of Minas Tirith. You cannot achieve victory through strength of arms.
When the shadow of Mordor reaches this city, it will begin.
Death is just another path. Die now.
The ring is mine.
This day we fight!
My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps. Through the real world, we strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian to Brain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian to Brain. And Brian, we are concluding our examination of the Lord of the Rings trilogy with The Return of the King. And Brian, I have to say that I made the decision that we should take a look at the extended cuts, and I knew going into this movie that when you there are 20 minutes of credits, but despite that, this movie is still 4 hours long. And I have to be honest, this is definitely the movie where I was like, you know what? These theatrical cuts are a very good idea. I have enough Return of the King at 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Look, man, this was just the DVD shill. I mean, I think they were really experimenting with that Fellowship of the Ring release extended edition, and it sold really well. So they did with Two Towers. So they figured, hey, we're going to do a Return of the King. And listen, man, it was a big DVD sale, and I guess just everyone was just kind of obsessed with the world, and I think the documentaries and the supplemental material helps with those DVD sales. But I think if it's just a one-time sit-through. I think you're just going to watch it once and then save it as like a collector's thing and then watch the theatrical cuts regularly, because I don't think I'm ever going to watch Return of the King extended cut again, because a lot of these scenes are kind of just, I don't know, more obstacles in the way of Frodo trying to destroy the ring when it doesn't really need to have these extra scenes here and there. And it's more of these extended scenes that really are just, just trim it down. So I think it was just kind of like a money grab at this point. I understand like the first release, because the first one did have some scenes that I thought were really kind of crucial down the line. And then some of the scenes in Two Towers, like the one with Boromir and Boromir with their father, I thought that was pretty relevant. Here, it seems like everything that was in the theatrical cut was pretty much what was needed. The extra stuff here was kind of nice, and then some of it was just kind of unnecessary. Like, it was a nice cherry on top to see Eowyn and Faramir kind of have that, the beginning of their relationship. We got hints of it towards that ending sequence, but it was kind of cool to see that scene of them kind of bonding at the beginning when everyone was out and they were kind of hurt, left behind. But that's kind of it, I think. I can't think of any other scene that kind of was relevant to the last final cut of the movie that was theatrical.
So I think one of the important deleted scenes that we are going to talk about is Saruman's ultimate demise. Saruman, of course, was played by Christopher Lee. This was a pretty controversial decision. Christopher Lee was not amused that his character was cut from the theatrical release. And I have to say that his death is pretty grisly, and I think almost could have warranted an R rating with how bad it was. In an interview done after the release of the extended edition DVD, he acknowledged that the makers gave him several arguments for trimming the scene, including pacing and time constraints. But in his opinion, none of them justified omitting such an important narrative element. As a result, Lee and Peter Jackson had a brief falling out. Lee eventually agreed to appear in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey and asked Jackson if his scenes had been cut when he was invited to the premiere. So Christopher Lee was a little bit salty. And what is amusing to me about this is that if you think about Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, which came out a couple years later, that his death scene did not get cut from that movie, as Count Dooku is killed at the beginning. So it's amusing to me that at the beginning of the third movie of two different trilogies, Christopher Lee's character meets his demise.
Yeah, kind of how weird that thing, it just plays out like that, you know what I mean? Two different franchises, iconic franchises, especially like, because they were in both the second chapters, it's pretty much they're the main villain of the second chapter, you know what I mean? So that was a little funny too, and the coincidences, but I'm glad they cut that scene out, to be honest, because it made it seem like, I don't know, it wasn't as big of a threat because they took him out so easily once Gandalf and all them showed up, and then for the save, but I mean they didn't really save him obviously, but when they finally showed up and then they took him out, I was just like, God, that was so easy in comparison to like this. I don't know, it just felt like he was this big time villain that was gonna be really hard to take out, and then at the end of the Two Towers, it was kind of assumed that he died. I wanted to just kind of leave it at that, and just kind of leave it like, okay, he died in the battle or whatever. We don't see him, and he's done. But the way they kind of killed him off in the extended cut was kind of like, wow. They kind of like, I don't know if they just cheapened him a little bit, but it felt like they kind of lowered his, I don't know, his how do I say this? His overness, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't as a badass villain as he was seeing him die like that, you know what I mean? And the way you describe it, like the R rating possibly of him getting the way he died, like he falls from the tower and gets spiked on a fucking windmill thing, and then the windmill thing goes under the water, and that's even worse because now his body's drowning. But it was pretty graphic. But I'm just like, you know, I'm glad they didn't see that. And then the way that Wormtongue dies too, I kind of just like the idea of them dying at the end of Two Towers and we just don't see him again. I don't know. And then it was weird because there's the way that they kill Wormtongue is like Legolas shoots it with an arrow, but he's shooting him, I don't know, like what, 50, 80 feet in the air? I don't know how arrows work, but that to me, that made no sense to me when I saw that. I was like, there's no way he could have hit him with that arrow from that high up, aiming up at a tower, and then hit it. So I don't know. It was just kind of weird.
Who are you to doubt Orlando Bloom?
Listen, when he's firing downward, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. But come on, man, let's this thing logically here. I'm glad they cut that out. You know, but if he did it when he was riding I don't know, like a shield, like a skateboard going upward, then maybe I'd buy into it.
So there are other things to point out about this movie that I think are worthwhile. A couple differences from the book, and one thing the same. The first thing, same thing for both the movie and the book. The last spoken line, "Well, I'm back," is also the last line of the book. So some nice symmetry there. One other thing that Peter Jackson decided to keep, even though he disliked the Army of the Dead. He himself, despite the fact that there is a giant spider, orcs, talking trees, this is where Peter Jackson draws the line, as the Army of the Dead, thinking it was too unbelievable, kept it in the script because he did not wish to disappoint diehard fans of the book. And I don't know about you, Brian, but I definitely got that Pirates of the Caribbean vibe from this, just with everything going on, the look, the design. And there's a really cool moment where you see the Army of the Dead kind of swarm the elephant and some of the orcs, and that's a really cool scene. But I would agree with Peter, the Army of the Dead are very much a very convenient deus ex machina.
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching this the first time in the theater, I was expecting like dudes in like grotesque like makeup kind of thing, like the orcs were gonna be, but then they did them all digitally, and I was kind of disappointed. But then the way they used it, it's like, okay, Army of the Dead, they're using them as ghosts, so they can just pretty much do whatever they want physically on the enemy. And then, yeah, the way that they were introduced and that tower, I thought it was pretty badass. The way that, or not the tower, the little that mountain path. I thought that was really cool the way they did it, because at least that gave Peter Jackson to kind of, you know, flex his horror. Because he's a horror director, so that's kind of what he's, you know, up his alley. So I'm glad he was able to do that in this movie a little bit. But it kind of I don't know, have you seen The Frighteners? Because it reminded me of The Frighteners more than it did Pirates of the Caribbean, because it's the same kind of way that they did the Ghosts in The Fright.
I have not seen The Frighteners, or if I have, it's been a very long time.
Yeah, it's I recommend it. I mean, it's probably like the last you know, Michael J. Fox in a starring movie role before the disease kind of took over his movements. But still, I mean, it very much reminded me of that, and it was just the same kind of effect with the ghosts and all that. So I thought that was pretty cool. I just thought that, man, it was very convenient that they let the army go before the last battle. I thought, man, like, why didn't you just let them go after that? But then I guess they didn't realize they were going to go into battle again. But again, it's one of those plot holes that kind of you see through in a long 3.5-hour movie with this epic journey with, like, how come they didn't do this and how come they did this? But yeah, that's kind of where it is with the Army of the Dead. But I'm glad they kept them in it because it did look cool, especially when they get off the ship. You know what I mean? And then it looks like there's like, where's everybody? And then they just surprise him with the ghost. So that was a really cool visual.
So there is also the giant eagles as they fly into Mordor, and they help save Frodo and Sam. And the fans of the movie have speculated why they just didn't do this from the very beginning. This is something that is explained in the book. The filmmakers didn't think there would be a need to because they felt it was obvious why they didn't do this. It is not obvious. Because the Eye of Sauron would have been a major obstacle, but one of the things that is unclear is the fact that the Eagles did not take sides in the War of the Ring until the end, so they would not have assisted for this reason. So it's a little bizarre to me that I wish that the movie had explained this because, again, it is something, and this is something that fantasy is kind of known for, to have these kind of convenient things that happen, these Deus Ex Machinas, which we've talked about, with even Two Towers it happens. And I think it sort of happens here where they just come and magically rescue. And it's something that gets a lot worse in The Hobbit.
For sure. I totally understand it. But I was thinking, like, the same thing, like, God, the eye would have just caught him immediately. I mean, that's why the whole point of the Fellowship of the Ring is, like, they're so small in numbers so they can kind of, like, go through without being seen. So that was my thinking. I was like, okay, there's no way they could have done the Eagles because the eye would have seen them immediately, and then, boom, they would have just been taken out by the ring wraiths on those dragon things. So I'm just like, okay, that makes sense to me. But then I see the complaints and the logicals, and yeah, they probably should have explained it on screen or some kind of off, shoot line or whatever, just to kind of explain it. So I get that. And we can talk about the confusion to the Hobbit and the Eagles later, at some other date. I know you're not a fan of the Hobbit movies. I'm a fan of the first one. I know people use that as like that argument to kind of lower the value of the Lord of the Rings franchise because the goddamn Eagles. Like, they could have done that from the beginning. But then again, it's like the whole Raiders of the Lost Ark argument. You know what I mean? If Indiana Jones didn't interfere with the whole thing, they would have just melted anyway.
Because Nazis are bad. That's one of the major reasons why. Let's get into this interesting detail. To get enough extras for the Battle at the Black Gate, a few hundred members of the New Zealand Army were brought in. Why does New Zealand have an army? I don't know. They apparently were so enthusiastic during the battle scenes that they kept breaking the wooden swords and spears they were given. Brian, New Zealand is really good at a lot of things, and apparently they are also good at breaking these spears and swords. But it's really tough to criticize New Zealand given their achievements, both with COVID-19 and the fact that they played host to this trilogy.
Yeah, really cool to have like actual people on set. You know what I mean? We're kind of spoiled with the whole MCU style of the green screen and kind of just seeing these massive armies when it's just really a small amount of people. But I thought you can kind of tell, especially in the battle sequences in this movie, that they had a lot of extras on there. Like, I'd say the orcs were more the CGI, and a lot of the physical humans on the horses, that was a lot of the real. A lot of people there on set, and it was real. I think that's what makes these battle sequences so real, especially when like they're going down the line and he's like hitting the guy's got the sword hitting all the staffs and poles and stuff. Great stuff. It's a great visual, and it's really cool to like have the local army there and stuff. Because let's face it, like Lord of the Rings really helped put New Zealand even more on the map for Hollywood and like the world and like pop culture wise and stuff like that. And shout out to the Flight of the Conchords guys. I'm pretty sure they were extras in this movie, either this one or the other. They were hobbits from what I've heard, or that's the rumor. But shout out to Jermaine Clement, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they're also on your favorite vampire show. So
What We Do in the Shadows, both the movie and the very, very good FX television show. Let's talk about the fact that this movie was incredibly successful, not only at the box office, but at the Academy Awards. The Lord of the Rings trilogy became the most nominated film franchise in the history of this award show. 30 nominations in total between all three movies. This defeats the Godfather trilogy, which had 28, and the Star Wars film franchise, which had 21. in addition to that, of the 3 movies to have won 11 Academy Awards, which this movie did, it is the only one not to have received a single nomination for its acting. But if you look down the technical awards, basically of Lord of the Rings was nominated, it was getting it. That, of course, includes Best Director Peter Jackson. Really, there is no doubt who the MVP of this series is. And this is kind of the icing on the cake. This is Peter Jackson. This is the culmination of his career. This movie and him winning Best Director. It really can't get any better than this for him. And this is also the first sequel to win an Academy Award for Best Picture since The Godfather 2. No other sequel has won since this movie did, Brian. So those are your fun facts about Return of the King, Lord of the Rings, and the Academy Awards.
And let's face it, I think it deserved all the Academy Awards it won that year because, I mean, for all the technical stuff, yeah, because I think technical-wise, this is the best of the 3 in terms of the look. I think fucking Minas Tirith looks incredible, and they deserved every fucking award they got for making that place seem so real and alive and making it look like on the side of a mountain, and then having the sets and the way they lit it and having that white freaking tree. I don't know how they made it look so freaking white and pale. It was amazing. Just every technical award they deserved. And even credit to I think they won Best Original Score, and I think they won Best Original Song, and Annie Lennox won an Oscar for this movie. The Eurythmics from the 80s, Sweet Dreams Are Made of These. That's her. And she sang the song at the end. So I'm a fan of Annie Lennox. I think my favorite song is Walking on Broken Glass with Hugh Laurie in the music video from 92, I think. So that's a little sidetrack. But yeah, Annie Lennox won an Oscar for this movie. So a lot of cool things. I think I totally deserve it. And we were talking about this before we went on air, just like, the movies that were competing against this. I mean, clearly Return of the King was probably better than all of them. The only thing I could think of that was probably challenging it for the technical stuff was Master and Commander, and maybe Pirates of the Caribbean that year. But even then, I think Return of the King was better than all of them, even though Master and Commander had that more realistic, dirty, 1700, whatever, 1600, whatever, 1800s, whatever it took place, that look. I still think Return of the King looked better than whatever Russell Crowe was wearing in the movie.
I mean, to me, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind when you compare this to those 4 other movies. I think in a lot of ways you can adjudicate the Academy Awards 3 to 5 years later, and you can say, should this have really won? And I think in a lot of cases you would say that another movie deserved it. One of the best examples I think is 1994. Forrest Gump beating both Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction. That's probably not something that should have happened. And with the years of hindsight, I think we've grown to appreciate both Shawshank and Pulp Fiction so much more. But ultimately, I think in this case, there's no doubt in my mind that Return of the King should have won the Academy Award. I'm glad that it did, because I think if we had looked back and we see that, a Master and Commander or Seabiscuit, if they had won over Return of the King, I think it would have just further embarrassed the Academy, just like when Green Book won in 2019. I mean, that was just an embarrassment, because there's no way that anybody with an ounce of integrity believed that movie was actually the best one. It won in direct response because a movie like Moonlight won, and it's just really unfortunate. But in this case, Return of the King certainly was well deserving of winning all of the awards. And it's funny to look back and see that 45 million people watched the Academy Awards in 2003. Those ratings have gone down pretty significantly, and obviously we have all these streaming services and all these different options for people. But it's just amazing how much of a monoculture the Academy Awards used to be, and now it really just isn't.
And I don't know if that's to do with maybe that year there was a lot of like blockbuster type movies that were nominated for Best Picture. We mentioned Johnny Depp got nominated for Best Actor that year for Pirates of the Caribbean. Orlando Bloom, I guess, had a hell of a 2003 with 2 major blockbuster movies with Pirates of the Caribbean and Return of the King, so good for him. But yeah, I don't know what it is. Sometimes the stars align, and maybe this was like the perfect Academy Awards that was going to appease the casual fan, the casual moviegoer, and the Academy. So maybe it was just, perfect timing, and then everything kind of aligned. But everything since then, I don't know. I mean, at least we got Black Panther nominated for Best Picture. And to the note that it was the 3rd movie, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, because you really gotta. I mean, they really planned out a trilogy ahead of time to do that. for a Best Picture, it's tough, man. So I don't think that's ever going to happen again. It might happen maybe like an MCU movie, but then again, it wouldn't even be the third movie in the franchise. You know what I mean? It'd be a movie in the franchise. So I don't think that feat's going to be done again because, I mean, goddamn, Godfather seemed like once in a lifetime kind of thing to do. You know, I mean, all three of Godfathers were nominated for Best Picture, so I guess it's the only two trilogies to do so.
Yeah, I don't think we don't need to talk about The Godfather 3 on this podcast. There's a reason that we are not doing the Godfather trilogy because I refuse to watch number 3 ever again. We just pretend, just like Rocky 5 didn't happen.
Damn, man. I like to think Rocky 5 was remade into Creed 2.
We like I said, we don't talk about Rocky 5 or Godfather 3 on these podcasts. Let's talk about memories of seeing this for the first time. I think I went to like a 10 a.m. screening on a Friday. I think I definitely saw this on the first day that it came out. Before, it's amazing. In the before time, when movie theaters were open, they used to not have Thursday night screenings, so you used to have to go on Friday in the morning if you wanted to see the first screening. They weren't even doing midnight screenings, I don't think, at this point. But I definitely saw this opening day, and it was a definite treat to be able to see this in the early morning at 3 hours and 20 minutes. It's probably the longest movie I'd ever seen up to this point in theaters as well. And yeah, I mean, by this point I was all in, and that's all I could really say.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a tradition 3 years in a row. Like I went after school, took the bus to the local theater that's near my house, that same independent theater. They had the Lord of the Rings. You know, hardly anyone was there because, you know, everyone flocks to the malls and stuff like that. This was an independent theater, so it was nice. Had my favorite popcorn. I have a lot of great memories of that theater, man. So it was nice to kind of reflect and remember. And yeah, this was the longest movie I'd seen up to that point. I mean, Titanic was probably the longest. This is probably, I mean, I think this is like 10 minutes longer than Titanic, but yeah, just crazy times. Cause like, I remember leaving that theater thinking like, wow, I experienced like this journey for the last 3 years, you know what I mean? And just like, it's over, you know, like, wow, okay. And then the fallout with like, you know, the Oscars and stuff like that. So it was really cool to see like a crowning achievement. And then hearing afterward that he was going to do King Kong got me really excited. So I think everything kind of was like a great, perfect storm for Peter Jackson. Cause I think even King Kong, you know, still is a success to this day because they're still using that at the Universal Studios tour, right? So I think everything kind of just was perfect. Just leading into this, I still think it was the #1 box office for. Well, I don't think those because it came out at the end of December, so I don't think you can count the January box office, but definitely one of the biggest box offices of 2003 as well. So everything was just meant to be.
So I think, yeah, just going on this 3-year journey, I think it felt like something special. And the other thing that's so extraordinary to me is that there used to be a time when you would go see a movie and the movie would just be that. It would be your 2-hour story, your 3-hour story. But I think at this point, this is the first time that I had seen a movie that consciously was trying to be a trilogy from the very beginning. Of course, I had seen Star Wars, but that's a completely different thing. Star Wars had already been in theaters, and it wasn't like a quote-unquote new experience. Even something like The Matrix, which of course had 2 movies come out the same year as Return of the King, that wasn't the same because The Matrix was originally supposed to be one movie, and then they kind of shoehorned this idea of the trilogy, and ultimately I don't think it worked. But I think we're at a point now when it seems like there are so many different franchises going on and different ways of finding out what's happening next that I think we've gotten used to the idea of the movie as like an extended, very expensive TV show. And that's just not something that really happened in 2001, 2, and 3. And the fact that we had something like this, I think it just speaks to just how important this film is to the history of cinema and all the technological advances and everything that they were able to do, filming all 3 of these movies at the same time. And ultimately, I think the things that still work about this movie, you know, I do think that there are aspects of it. I do think it's too long, and we can get into some of that in what doesn't work. But I think the ultimate idea of Aragorn becoming the king, I think you see him in the first movie, you see him in the second movie, and then in this movie, he's the leader. He is very much channeling his, I guess, his inner Mel Gibson from Braveheart and the Patriot in multiple occasions. And I think this is the movie that we really see Viggo Mortensen really give his best performance. And I think it's a shame that he did not get nominated at the very least for it. I'm not sure he should have won, but definitely I think you see him not only become the king, but he does so much with even singing the songs and the way he is as an action star. It's something very, very special. And, Viggo Mortensen has had a very solid career, and he's been in some very noteworthy things since this, but this is definitely the peak of his career. And this movie, in fact, is the peak of it. And it's amazing to think that he almost was not Aragorn. And, he came in late, and he's kind of the person that you walk away from this movie thinking, well, this guy is probably going to be the biggest star and probably going to have the biggest career of anyone involved, at least in front of the camera.
Yeah, he did a hell of a job, and it's great to see like an arc like that. And at the time, we're not really like aware of it, because I think what the MCU movies have done is we be able to pick up on things that like mean stuff later on, right? We're always going to pick up on these things that we know are going to pay off later now in the MCU. And I think a lot of that kind of subconsciously came from watching the Lord of the Rings movies, because they do a lot of setup in the first two movies, and they give off a great payoff in the third one, like with Aragorn taking the throne, the sword, like the symbolism of him rebuilding, or not him rebuilding the sword, but they rebuilt the sword for him and then taking the sword back. You know what I mean? Reclaiming his identity. That's very powerful stuff, man. I thought they did a really great job with that, and him embracing his. I hate to compare it to Lion King, because I know that's so weird, but like it's very much like Lion King. You know what I mean? It's like he didn't want to be the king. He denied his heritage. But he finally had to step up when, the time of man needed him to be the leader. And he became the leader. And he stepped up. 87 years old and all, you know what I mean? So he did a hell of a job, man. And then post, Lord of the Rings, I mean, I haven't seen all of his work, but I mean, goddamn, History of Violence is tremendous. I mean, depending on how you feel, I have mixed emotions on the plot, but his performance in him and with Ed Harris in that movie is tremendous. And then I've seen Eastern Promises. He was a hell of a Russian badass at that. So he's done some crazy stuff, man. He's always willing to do different kind of things. Oh man, I forgot that other movie too, where it was the apocalyptic one, and like it's the end of the world. And then I think it's The Road. You ever seen The Road? That's a great one too. So The
Road is a phenomenal book. The movie just doesn't capture what makes the book great, and it's really, really hard to capture what makes the book great for reasons that you would have to read the book to find out. But it's really unfortunate, because I did not think that the movie was very good.
Damn, I remember being good but not phenomenal, but I guess I got to read the book now, because damn. Okay, but still, he was great in that too, I think, performance-wise. I think he doesn't have to be this big movie star, but he still has this like presence to him. Like if you put him in one of the main, like in an independent movie, and you book him, it's going to get attention. And he's done that for a lot of independent movies in the last 15 years since then. So I think he's done a great job for the independent film community since then. So I think that he took this and kind of, instead of like just trying to like, I don't know, take it to the next level with his career, he kind of settled in and just picked his roles and his spots, and he knew what he can do and his strengths, and he played his strengths well. You know what I mean? And I think he's got how many Oscar nominations since then?
Yeah, he's definitely had a solid career. I don't think that he has ever been a part of a franchise as big as this, and he's never done a Marvel movie. He's never really done a DC movie, but he has certainly done some very interesting projects over the course of the last 15 years or so. I think something else, besides talking about Viggo Mortensen, I think we have to talk about the two major battles that take place. And in some ways they are bigger than the Helm's Deep battles, and because they were shot during the day, I'm sure that there were a lot of complications. But I think that those big battles, I don't think they are as epic as Helm's Deep, because Helm's Deep had such a build up to it. But I think that, again, Peter Jackson does such a good job of shooting those scenes, always giving you the opportunity to understand the geography of what's going on. and seeing what is happening in some of these battle scenes. Because I think so much, and this is not a direct criticism of like Game of Thrones like last time, but I think something that directors sometimes don't do is they don't do a good job of getting across the geography of specific spaces. And I think what Peter Jackson does so almost impeccably in these movies is gives you a sense of what is going on and where people are, how these different buildings are constructed. And I very, very much appreciated that throughout. And I think the battle scenes, they also have there's depth to them, and there's emotions that are attached to them with Gandalf and what he's trying to do with Marion and everything going on in Gondor. So yeah, I think that the big battles, just on a macro level and on a micro level, I think overall they very much work in this movie.
Again, I'm gonna go with the wrestling comparison, but I felt like the first battle, it was booked like almost like a War Games, because like they were definitely the underdogs, and Gandalf and all the Ministerians, because they were undermanned. You know what I mean? The orcs were coming, so they were just outnumbered by like what, thousands, and then the riders of Rohan come in to kind of even the the odds. So you got like the even stakes, but then the elephants come in and change the odds again. So it's almost like watching a War Games. You know what I mean? With the odds going back and forth. So I love that about the first battle, where it was telling the story of like, okay, they're the underdogs. Okay, now we're even again. Oh no, the elephants are coming in. Now we're really outnumbered. What the hell are we gonna do? And then they figured that out, that they got to just, it's just like the things from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Is it the AT-ATs, I think they're called? I forget, but they got to take them down with the legs, and that's exactly what they did. They took the elephants down by the legs, and I was thinking the same thing. Oh well, they got to go, do the Empire Strikes Back thing, like Spider-Man says, and they did it. So I thought that was really good, like logical thinking in terms of like, okay, now all of a sudden there's a giant obstacle on the battlefield. How do we take these down? And they figured it out immediately, and that's what they go to. But unfortunately, it kind of leads to the death of the king because he gets crushed. But still, like, I thought that battle was tremendous, and it leads to this great moment that's, I don't know, top 3, one of my favorite moments of the whole series, where Eowyn takes off her helmet and says, "I am no man," and boom, just kills that motherfucker. And fucking just, it felt so good to watch that in the theater, because I remember watching her in Two Towers the year prior, just wanting so bad to be in the battle, and she finally sneaks in and has her moment. And it's great. It just is such a great cathartic moment for her, and it proves that, I don't know, it just kind of spoke to me a lot. I don't know, it's like a wrestling metaphor to me, like, I don't know, intergender wrestling kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, if you book it right, the woman can go over, and she did go over, and she kicked ass.
Right, and I think that this naturally leads us to talking about the death scenes. As Theoden and Gollum, they are the two most significant deaths. I don't necessarily know how to qualify what Frodo and the elves, and I mean, it's like they're going to a farm. It's like when you tell your kids that the dog has gone to a farm when he's really died. That's the equivalency that I'm going for. I hope I haven't ruined your life, Brian, by saying that. If your parents ever told you that any of your dogs went to a farm, they did not go to a farm.
No, I didn't have any dogs, but I did have some fish when I was in kindergarten, and they just told me straight up 3 days later that they died because they didn't clean the thing. So there you go.
Wow. So your parents were just straight up people, huh?
Yeah, and then if I had a dog right now, I would just, I don't know, I would probably be getting him stoned, or her stoned.
My goodness, what a response to that. There's no real way to follow that. So I'm just going to go back to talking about these death scenes, and I think the Theoden one, I mean, I'll kind of let you handle that one, but what's so special about the Gollum death is that they could have done that prologue in any of the 3 movies to show what happened to him, to understand that this is a person who has been on a journey. He was a human, he was a person, and then he makes this choice. The ring kind of consumes him, and we slowly see him both physically and mentally degenerate to the point where he becomes Gollum. And I like that they saved it for this movie, because in a movie where there's so much going on, especially because there's so much battle stuff going on, there's a lot less character work going on amongst the characters, but they specifically go out of their way to explain who Gollum is. And I really, really appreciated that because it just makes his death so much more impactful. Because at the beginning of this movie, we see Smeagol descend to Gollum, and then ultimately at the end, he dies because he loves his precious too much. And I just really, really love that scene, and I really love the concept of Gollum being kind of the most tragic figure in the Lord of the Rings. And I understand that Frodo and Gandalf both technically, quote-unquote, die, but this one, it really had an impact, and it's something that is still stuck with me all of these years later. What a fantastic journey for this character, and it's a real shame that the Academy did not give Andy Serkis and this creative team, whether it was for Two Towers or Return of the King, the fact that they did not give them a special Oscar, I think, because I think this is an incredible achievement put on film.
Yeah, that beginning, man, it's heartbreaking, and you can tell like that it's supposed to show you how much, evil can corrupt, you know what I mean? And we see it in today's society, but I guess that ring is the very symbol of, evil and corruption and taking the soul. Like, he's a hobbit, you know what I mean? He was a hobbit, and hobbits are supposed to be like these kind folk and earth-like folk, but immediately both those hobbits at the beginning, it takes over them immediately. You know what I mean? And it kind of shows you how strong mentally Frodo is in comparison, because him and Bilbo, because it doesn't really take over them as much. But still, it's so heartbreaking. The fact that he kills his own, like his best friend, and then he just deteriorates. And then him going up in the mountain was like the whole thing about that opening sequence to me was that they used like the prosthetic makeup and stuff before the final shot of CGI. So to me, whenever you do that, it just looks creepier because it's real. You know what I mean? You're actually seeing it, and it's hard to watch. You know what I mean? It's very hard to watch because it kind of reminded me of work, this latest watch through, because at work I kind of have to figure out, okay, who's these scumbags here staying at the hotel or whatever, right? And then I see these pictures of them, and then I see them what they look like on their ID, and then in real life, and it's like, god damn, drugs just really fuck them up. Like they're like a completely different person on their photo ID, and that's exactly what you see in the beginning of this movie. So it's very eye-opening. And then the death, I don't know, it seems like he's at peace at the end, right? That's kind of what it is. He's finally at peace with himself or whatever, and then he's dying with the ring. So it's kind of like he's dying with his precious, but still like that death. I mean, it's almost like that in the cartoon too, because I remember watching Return of the King, and it's almost the same kind of layout. It's the way it happens in the book. Frodo's finger gets bitten off, and he does that monkey flip with Gollum, and then they go both down, but then Frodo lives. But still, like, it was hard to watch. And then the death of Theoden, that's how, how else can that guy go out? You know what I mean? He's going to go down a hero. He's probably one of the better on-screen kings I've ever seen in a movie. He's willing to do the right thing. It takes responsibility. He's willing to protect his people. He's willing to die in the battlefield for his people. So I love that character a lot, and the way he went out. I thought, it wasn't cheap. He died fighting a giant elephant. So, he's a fighting warrior, man. And then kind of giving the throne to Eowyn. She's going to be the queen now or whatever. So that was pretty cool. Everything kind of was tightly wrapped up in that little sequence in that first battle with when she killed the dude, and then he passes away and kind of gives away the crown to her. So everything kind of fit. I thought that was really well done, man. So the two important deaths, yeah, totally, stood out for sure. And then Frodo and Gandalf, they're going to the, I don't know, not the motherland, but somewhere where they're not going to die or not. I don't know. Maybe
is it Imagination Land?
Let's go with that. Let's go with the South Park reference from 2007, y'all, in Imagination Land, because that's probably where they came up with all the ideas. Their imagination.
Imagination. Love that song.
That was also a 3-part series as well. So there you go.
I believe it was originally supposed to be a sequel to the South Park movie, and then they just turned it into the 3-part series, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, actually, I heard that story too, and I actually enjoyed it more as 3 episodes, because I don't think it would have had lasting legs as a movie, because I think they would have stretched out too many stuff. That's a side thing we can talk about later on, though.
What's pretty incredible is that you can actually watch all 3 of these movies and that episode on the same streaming service, that, of course, being HBO Max. So you could go watch the 3 Lord of the Rings theatrical cuts and then go watch Imagination Land. What a world we live in, Brian.
Yes, but for now, I'm just going to rely on my friend's passport and check out some of the special stuff here and there, and then wait for my, 2021. Yeah, the thing you're not looking forward to that thou shall not be named on this podcast.
Oh, we are not that. No, we're just not. So I want to talk about the giant spider because I really liked it, and I don't know why I liked it. I think it's because Peter Jackson is a horror director, and the thing that I like about the spider is that the spider's not just there for like 5 minutes, does something, and then leaves. Like, that spider sequence is pretty extensive, and Frodo is in real danger throughout. And there's a point when you think that Frodo has gotten away from the spider, and then the spider just comes out of nowhere and stabs him. It's pretty brilliant. I absolutely love the way that it's executed, and I think we all know about giant spiders from Wild Wild West, and most of you, if you don't know, then you should know about Kevin Smith's story about the giant spider. But it just works out so well here. I love just even the design of it. It still holds up tremendously well, and it's continues to boggle my mind that CGI in 2003 looks better than CGI does in 2020. But I really like that sequence, and just the way the Frodo, Sam, Gollum dynamic plays out in this movie, I think is so brilliant, because Gollum basically makes the decision that he has to get rid of Sam, and it's very emotional, and I'm just tremendously impressed by their performances, because part of the thing about these three is that they're not really involved in action. There's not a lot of fighting that goes on, just a little bit with the spider, but so much of it is about the emotions that are surrounding these three characters. And for that reason, I just have a tremendous amount of appreciation for that sequence. And just Elijah Wood and Sean Astin and Andy Serkis, the way that they interacted with each other, I think turned out tremendously well. And yeah, I mean, that's really all that can be said. They took something that could have been very stupid. It could have been very generic, just kind of your typical horror movie thing. And I think they made it into something far bigger and much more special.
Yeah, what I really liked about that sequence is the fact that they had Sam step up. You know what I mean? That was the first time he stepped up and like took on the spider head on. And he just it was like this big heroic moment. You know what I mean? I thought that whole sequence was fantastic because I don't know, the first two movies he's not doing much. He's not doing really heroic stuff. And then all of a sudden when his back is against the wall and he has no choice, he steps up, man, and that thing he defeated the spider like the smartest way possible. He went, picked the spots, he's got to move, you know what I mean? And he did it right. And I still find it hard to believe that whole spider was CGI. I'd like to think that parts of it were still like, they built some giant arms here and there and filmed some of the giant arms, but I guess not. But because, I mean, it looks so detailed, even though it was like this grayish kind of color palette with the dirt in the background. It was kind of darkly lit with the clouds, but I don't know. It still looks so realistic to me. Yeah, I see what you mean. And the way that they had the design underneath the spider, I thought was great. I don't know what it is, man, but Peter Jackson and giant spiders kind of work. I mean, they brought back some of the giant spiders in King Kong, in the 2005 King Kong, and I thought that really worked. So he knows what he's doing, man. Maybe he should direct a remake of Arachnophobia and go small scale.
Maybe at some point we could discuss what Peter Jackson should be doing, because it just feels like maybe The Hobbit broke him a little bit, and he really hasn't done a lot since. But we can have that conversation another time. So while I think Return of the King is a tremendous movie, one of my personal favorites, I think there are things about this movie that don't work. I think the extended cut, and I know it's the extended cut, but at 4 hours, I mean, I think it's too long, flat out. I didn't necessarily mind going 3.5 hours with the first two movies, but at 4 hours, it just felt ridiculous. And I think the editing of the endings, like, let's say that, okay, so there are 12 endings, right? And for me, I've always believed that the theatrical ending should have been Aragorn being crowned as king and them bowing to the hobbits. I think for this story, what they were trying to do, to me, that should have been the ending of the theatrical cut. If you want to add some of the endings and ultimately go with what they went with Frodo and Gandalf and Sam and what they were all doing, then that's fine. But for me, even just having those 12 endings there were so many blackouts in this movie, Brian. Just very poor editing on their part. These endings needed to be made more seamless, whether it was the theatrical cut or whether it was the extended cut. So for me, the editing of this movie, by including all the endings, not including the death of Saruman, it's a little bit disappointing to me, because I think that I certainly understand why this movie won for best editing, and I'm not necessarily going to argue against it, but it kind of bothers me that the choices that they made and what they included versus what they didn't, even in the theatrical version.
Yeah, in the extended cut, they have these scenes where it's just like they throw more obstacles to Sam and Frodo. It's like, there's this one scene where they get merged into this army when they're trying to hide in the armor, and they get kind of set back another 50 feet or so, and it's just like, great, we're just kind of setting them back even further. And it was kind of frustrating because in the end, you really didn't need that scene at all, and they just left it in the extended cut. The thing with the multiple endings, I think it would have been better if after the part where he gets crowned king and they all bow, I think they should have just put epilogue. You know what I mean? And just that way, it's like the post credit, not post credit, but like post story kind of thing. Because I think that would have made more sense, because then it just feels like, okay, is this over? Is this over? But knowing that it's an epilogue, it's going to be kind of a different tone, not necessarily ending, but you're going to get kind of wrap up of all these different characters, right? I think that's what they should have done, since they were going with the whole like visual narrative, like the whole visual storytelling thing with the book and everything. They could have just wrote, like, even fucking Frodo could have just wrote epilogue on a page, you know what I mean? And just do that. But they kind of just went with it. And I get what you're saying, because like whenever you do a fade out, at least this is what I was taught back in the day. Fade out is like, that scene is done. Don't go back to it. Or like you do a fade out at the end of a movie, the movie's done. You know what I mean? Because it's telling the audience we're going to get up now. But then they did like 2 or 3 of them, and I was like, oh, that kind of fooled me. And I don't know how I feel about that. And yeah, I don't like it when they do that, like a fade out in black. If you have more stuff, just cut, you know what I mean, or fade and crossfade, you know what I mean. Don't fade to black, because fade to black is like you're done, you know what I mean. So I get that complaint. And then just that's pretty much it for me in terms of that. The only other thing I wasn't kind of liking is like I didn't understand like how long it took them to get across like the plains, like the Mordor plains, like that looked like a fucking 2-day journey, but they went there in like 2 hours maybe. I don't know if my depth of perception is off, or like I don't know, it just seems like a way further from the moment where they where they get the armor on and then they have to go and walk up the mountain. It just seems like that would have been a couple days at least, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of off on that.
I think the only other thing that really doesn't work for me is the lack of nominations for the actors. I really, really do wish that they had come up with a way to get these actors some credit. I think that having them win would have been really difficult because, again, 11 nominations. This movie is already a giant box office winner, so I think maybe it's bad form to even have the actors nominated. But to me, I look at Viggo Mortensen and Elijah Wood and Sean Astin. In particular, I think those 3, and you can throw Andy Serkis in there, but I think it's a little different with him as far as motion capture versus voiceover. But I think those 3 performances in particular, those are the ones that really stand out for me as far as acting goes. And I think it's something that I think they should have, at the very least, been nominated. And that's really all I have to say. Brian, any response to this? Anything else that didn't work for you?
In terms of the lack of nominations, I get it. I would have pushed for Sean Astin, to be honest. Like, to me, that was if you had to pick one, because it seems like, especially in the first one, if they had to pick one, they went with Ian McKellen. The second one, it seemed like they didn't push for it at all. The third one they could have with Aragorn and Viggo Mortensen, they easily could have, but I don't think they just wanted to. I mean, let's face it, Johnny Depp got nominated, right? But then if you weigh the performances, like, is Johnny Depp's performance better than, Return of the King and Aragorn? You know what I mean? So if they were going for that level, then he could have easily gotten nominated if they kind of, pushed and paid for the right, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Because with the Oscars, it's always this campaign. You gotta campaign and pay. And you basically got to get, from what I've heard, this is kind of the metaphor, you got to get your screener to the top of the pile when you're talking to these people watching your screeners and voting. So if it wasn't a priority to get the nomination for Best Actor, they probably didn't push it as high. But as long as they got the technical stuff in the Best Picture, I bet they were satisfied. I think that was the kind of compromise. Because usually what I've noticed when it comes to ensemble casts like this, and the cast are so big, it's really hard to nominate one person in particular, you know what I mean? So I understand that, and that's always the thing with ensemble cast. That's what I've noticed. I don't know about you, but it just seems that way because it's so hard to isolate one performance. Like something like, I don't know, one, example I'm pulling out of my ass is Network, because that is kind of an ensemble, but it was smaller, like much smaller, and like all four of them got nominated, you know what I mean? Because it was just four standout performances. Here it's like a whole bunch of them, so it's hard to pick from. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
No, I certainly think that the case that you're making is legitimate, and there's so much to say about this movie, and so much that has been said. We've certainly talked about the extended cuts, but this is by no means comprehensive. If you go and if you have the extended editions, go and watch the documentaries, because it is just unbelievable to me what was done, and just the meticulous detail that was put into so many of these scenes. And it's not just this movie, it's all three movies. And it really feels like the Academy just decided, oh well, we're going to reward this movie because it's the final one. But you certainly could have made the argument that these movies could have very easily all won Best Picture, or they all could have won the individual technical achievements that it did. So I think that it's tremendously impressive to me that they were able to do this. And yeah, I mean, I'm just really, really happy with how this franchise turned out. This definitely got me into fantasy franchise filmmaking. And for that, I have to give this movie a lot of credit. As you know, Brian, I am currently working on my list of my 100 favorite movies of all time, and this entire trilogy is in because it's incredible. I mean, just for the achievement alone, it's incredible, and it really feels like nothing is ever going to be able to top it. And Game of Thrones has, I think, to an extent tried. I think there have been other movie franchises that have tried and achieved some level of success. But to get the mixture of both the box office and awards consideration, no franchise has ever been able to do what Peter Jackson did with Lord of the Rings. And we'll get to the MVP and the best performance in a second, but I just wanted to say that before we move on.
Yeah, I would say this is my favorite, the theatrical cut of Return of the King. So if I were to rank them, I would probably say, like, Fellowship of the Ring, I'd give 8.5 out of 10. Two Towers, I'd probably give the same 8.5 out of 10, but slightly more exciting because of the stuff with Rohan and Helm's Deep. And then this one I give a 9 out of 10 because it I think there's a lot of payoff that they build up to in the first two movies that pays off really well with everything going on with the character arcs and stuff like that. And the visuals I thought were even more impressive than Two Towers, just because I felt like I mentioned before, Minas Tirith is just an accomplishment within itself. Like that whole set was incredible, because it's a mixture of the miniatures and the live action set. So yeah, just incredible visually. And then one more thing I forgot to add, for what still works, I love the end credits. I love the way it's put together, the hand-drawn thing. It's kind of like this final farewell to the character, so they do it special and unique. So I thought that was a really well done touch. In terms of something topping this, I don't think it can, but it's got to be, I don't know, like if you did Avatar, maybe, and that's because it's really hot right now, and I'm watching it now, and I'm kind of blown away by it. But if you did, if you ignored the M. Night Shyamalan stuff and did it proper and did it right with the right tone, maybe.
I mean, I'm not going to bet against James Cameron, but I'm not necessarily going to bet on him either, if that makes sense. I think Avatar is an incredible theatrical experience. But
no, I'm talking about the show.
Oh, you're talking about the show.
Airbender, baby. Yeah, I think it works.
I think if they were able to do it correctly, it would be really hard. It has to be a TV show, because you can't do it. Even in a trilogy, you can't do Avatar correctly because there's so much story. There's about 30 to 35 hours. Each episode's about 25 minutes. There's about 30 to 35 hours of story. You can't get that across in 9 hours. Even if you did 3 3-hour movies, you just couldn't do it.
I think you can do it in 6 movies, but I think that's the closest thing if you're going to come to that level of like audience appreciation and Oscar level stuff. I think you can pull it off if you give the right people to do it live action, because watching that show now, it reminds me a lot of Star Wars, it reminds me a lot of Lord of the Rings and the epic fantasy stuff, and that might be the closest franchise that you can kind of, finance and put together. But Netflix is doing the live action show, so maybe they're not even gonna do the movies anymore. But that's the only fantasy franchise I can think of that could probably try and even do that now. But now, like 3 movies ahead of time, it's even a gamble now because that first movie is gonna make or break, and you got lucky with Fellowship that was so good.
Do you realize who one of the directors was on the first season of Avatar?
No.
If you look at the end credits, you will notice that Dave Filoni is the director of many of the first season, just the first season of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Well, that says a lot. I know we're going off topic, but trust me, it's all connected because this is all epic fantasy stuff, and it's all related in the themes and stuff. And if we're placing bets on franchises in the future, this could be one of them.
Well, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think it's fantasy. It's a mix of fantasy with anime. The Dragon Prince is probably much closer to this as far as genre goes, and it has a lot of the same people behind it as did Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I think that is worth pointing out. And I think as far as the MVP, I think we've talked about Peter Jackson and just what he was able to do. And again, this is a guy, if you look at his career beforehand, I think he was generally regarded as kind of this solid B-movie horror director. Because of this, he basically got to do whatever he wanted. And what he chose to do with that was to make a King Kong movie that I think was pretty successful, but was way too long at 3 hours. Then he has executive produced a number of projects, and then he directed The Hobbit. And instead of making The Hobbit 1 3-hour movie, the studio, because of their greed and their increasing need to make money, they insisted on 3-hour versions of those movies. And I mean, I think those movies are a disaster. I think they certainly made money, but I don't think they have near the pop cultural stickiness. I know that you appreciate the first one, but just everything that I remember about The Hobbit is just being incredibly bored by so much of it. I know that there were technical problems with the way it was shot. How do you pronounce smog or smog or however? Like there were jokes about that at the time. So, Peter Jackson, this is his moment, and he absolutely deserves all of the award nominations and all of the credit for bringing this, because just looking at his career since, he's never been able to match it. And in some ways, I think that makes this even more special.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I guess he did peak, but I just felt like King Kong was still such a success that maybe he kind of peaked after that. Maybe he kind of peaked right at the end of the first Hobbit movie. Maybe that's why I like the first Hobbit movie so much, but who knows? But my MVP, as opposed to, Peter Jackson, obviously for the technical side of things, I got to go with Sean Astin, because just like, I mean, the fact that he's crying so much in this movie, he's crying at the beginning, he's crying at the end, and he cries at the epilogue. You know what I mean? He carries all the emotion, I feel, in this movie. And I mean, him and Frodo are carrying it a lot, but I just felt like Sam is just, I don't know. And then the fight with the spider really gets kind of awe-inspiring to me, because like that character is just a cook or a gardener or whatever, and all of a sudden he's fighting a spider and standing up for himself and defending his friend. So I thought that was a great moment. And his performance, I don't know. It's like you either know Sean Astin from this or Rudy, right? And I've seen Rudy like twice, but to me, it's like he's gonna always be Sam and me to me. You know what I mean? And then I guess Bob from Stranger Things, but unfortunately he dies in that. So, but here he lives at the end. He gets the last line. But to me, he's the MVP of this movie.
Well, I guess that for best performance, then you are giving this to Sean Astin as well.
For best performance, yeah, Sean Astin, MVP of the. I mean, I'm going to go with Peter Jackson, obviously, for the technical stuff. And I guess second place, we got to mention what's his name? Howard Shore, I think his name is.
Howard Shore is his work on the score is pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the MVP is Peter Jackson, and for me, the best performance is Viggo Mortensen, and this shouldn't be a surprise based on everything I said. I don't think that you're wrong for saying Sean Astin. And again, I think there are 3 people from this movie that I would argue deserved at least a nomination for Academy Award: Sean Astin, Elijah Wood, and Viggo Mortensen. But to me, this is Viggo Mortensen's movie. The action, the speeches, just everything that he is being asked to do. And maybe this is the reason that he comes in late and he kind of has to grow into the role, but it really feels like he just literally naturally grew into being the king, and I think it really shows. And I think Viggo Mortensen is fantastic in this movie with everything that he does, and I mean, this is the pinnacle, and that's really all I could say. So that is the best performance to me. Certainly you could make an argument for Elijah Wood as well, but for me, I think this is very much Viggo Mortensen's movie.
Viggo Mortensen!
All right, Brian. So we are done talking about Return of the King, and we are done talking about Lord of the Rings. I am really glad that we were able to talk about this trilogy, something a little bit different from talking about kind of superhero franchises. Any final thoughts on the Lord of the Rings trilogy before we talk about what we're going to be doing next month?
I guess you really like Andy Serkis because you have this thing about picking 5 Andy Serkis movies in a row.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how I did that. Technically 6. He is technically in the first one, but
yeah, that's right. Technically.
Before we talk about what's coming up next month, and I swear I unconsciously just made this decision to pick the movies that I picked. Any final thoughts on the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
If you really watch the extended cuts maybe once or twice, just to see the differences, but definitely check out the theatrical cuts whenever you can on TNT. I mean, anytime they're on TNT or TBS or whatever, I'll still put it on the background if I happen to be in the kitchen or something, and still they have this lasting effect, man, and they've really influenced movie making today, and I really think they kind of influenced a lot of the MCU, whether they realize it or not, in terms of, like I said, planting seeds in the first movie and the second movie and then paying them off in the third movie. Doesn't that sound like Avengers? Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think that this is a tremendous achievement and really gave us a hint as to what was to come in blockbuster filmmaking, for better and for worse. I think this opened up the door to so many other fantasy franchises. I don't think you get a Game of Thrones. I don't think you get even necessarily the success of Avatar: The Last Airbender without this being as successful as it was. And even The Hobbit making as much money as it did, I think, is the residuals so much from this movie. So for those reasons, I think you just have to give a tremendous lot of credit. Next week, Brian and I, of course, we will take the first Tuesday off as our continuation, our discussion of Breaking Bad will continue. The first part of season 5 is going to be discussed next week. Kevin Ford and I will be doing that. And then we will return in 2 weeks to talk about Planet of the Apes. We are not discussing the 1968 and the 1970 sequels. We are going to be discussing the modern Planet of the Apes franchise, which starts with Rise and will continue on into other movies directed by Batman director Matt Reeves. So that is very exciting. And the main reason that I wanted to discuss this trilogy is, yes, these movies were financially successful, and I think these movies are really good, but I'm still not sure that they get the credit that they deserve for being as good as they are. So Brian and I are going to revisit the modern Planet of the Apes trilogy. We will probably talk about some background about the franchise, talking about the Charlton Heston movie, the god-awful Tim Burton movie, before we get into talking about what I think are 3 really good movies. I think, in particular, the sequels are extraordinary. I think War is incredible. And we're going to start getting into that in 2 weeks, Brian. And I did not even do this on purpose. I didn't even realize that we were discussing 6 Andy Serkis movies in a row until after I had made the choice that this is what we were going to do over the summer.
The subconscious is a powerful thing, my friend. So whether you realize it or not, that's what we're doing. And to be honest, I've seen every single Planet of the Apes movie now that I think about it. I own the original set. I got a good deal on that. I got the new trilogy coming in the mail soon, so we can review it. So I'm pretty excited. I used to own the Tim Burton one, but I sold that DVD a long time ago when I was getting rid of my DVDs and the Blu-ray overhaul. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the series. I think I've mentioned the guy I forget his name, but the guy who made the original score, Jerry Goldsmith, that's his name. I love that score from the first one. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. And what I'm really excited about is to see back to back to back the evolution of how incredible the cinematography gets throughout each movie. I don't know if you noticed that, but I thought it was quite the contrast between the first and third movie, which we can discuss later on.
Absolutely. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We will return in 2 weeks.
So I guess there's two returns now? The King and the Jedi?